She thought the marriage was fake until he introduced her as his wife and refused to let go. It was supposed to be simple. Sign the papers, follow the rules, walk away untouched. That was the promise she repeated to herself as the pen hovered over the line with her name. No love, no expectations, no future, just ink on paper and a favor exchanged, nothing more. Lena Harper had signed contracts her whole life, rental agreements, short-term jobs, medical forms that felt heavier than they should, but none of them had made her hands shake like this one. Marriage contract. Across the polished mahogany table sat Adrian Blackwood. He didn't rush her. That was the first thing she noticed. He sat back in his chair, jacket perfectly tailored, dark eyes unreadable, hands folded like he was waiting for a boardroom vote, not a woman agreeing to become his wife. There was no impatience in him, no pressure. If anything, he looked detached, as if this decision barely touched his life at all, which was exactly why she was here. "You can take your time," he said calmly. His voice was low, controlled. "This isn't something I want you to feel forced into." Lena let out a breath that was half laugh, half disbelief. That's ironic, considering the circumstances. Adrian's jaw tightened just a fraction, but he didn't argue the circumstances. 3 weeks ago, Lena had been served an eviction notice and a legal warning in the same envelope. Her aunt's medical debt, a predatory landlord, and a clause in a trust she hadn't even known existed. A trust that could only be accessed if she were legally married within 90 days. Adrian Blackwood had been her last option, and somehow her safest one. They weren't strangers, not exactly. He owned the investment firm that had quietly acquired the nonprofit she worked for before it collapsed. He'd noticed her then, competent, quiet, stubborn. When she reached out, desperate and humiliated, he'd listened. Then he'd made an offer, a fake marriage, 6 months, fully legal, mutually beneficial, no romance, no expectations. No physical relationship unless mutually agreed upon, which, according to Clause 17, was unlikely and unnecessary. She signed, the pen scratched against the paper, loud in the silent room. Adrian stood immediately once she finished, pressing a button on the desk. "I'll have my lawyer file this today." Just like that, no smile, no relief, no flicker of emotion. Lena stood too, suddenly unsure what came next. "So that's it for now," he said. "We'll need to make a public appearance within the week. There are eyes on me, questions, a wife eliminates them." She nodded. "I understand." "You'll move into the guest suite at the penthouse. Separate bedrooms, separate lives." "Of course." His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, then he stepped back, distance re-established. "Congratulations, Mrs. Blackwood," he said flatly. The title landed like something borrowed, temporary, not hers. The wedding happened 3 days later. There was no aisle, no dress shopping, no family drama, just a courthouse, 2 witnesses, and a quiet exchange of vows that felt more like a formality than a promise. Adrian wore a charcoal suit. Lena wore a simple cream dress she already owned. The judge smiled more than either of them did. When it was over, Adrian offered his arm. She hesitated, then took it, for the cameras waiting outside. His hand rested lightly over hers, not possessive, not intimate, just enough to sell the illusion. "This is only for show," he murmured as they stepped into the flash of cameras. "You're doing fine." Her smile didn't falter even as her heart raced. "You're very reassuring. I'm efficient." That much was obvious. The penthouse was everything she expected. Cold elegance, glass walls, city lights stretching endlessly below. Lena was shown to her suite by a silent house manager who addressed her as Mrs. Blackwood like it was the most natural thing in the world. That night she sat alone on the edge of the bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling. She was married, on paper, to a man she barely knew, and yet she told herself this was survival, not fantasy, not romance, just business. The first public test came sooner than she expected. A charity gala, black tie, press everywhere. Adrian stood beside her in the mirror as she adjusted the borrowed necklace at her throat. He looked composed, untouchable as ever. But when she stepped back, he paused. "You look appropriate," he said after a moment. She raised an eyebrow. "That's the nicest thing you've said to me all week." He almost smiled, almost. At the venue, people turned, whispered, watched. She felt his hand settle at the small of her back, firm this time, protective, not the light, forgettable touch from before. "Remember," he said quietly, "you don't need to speak unless you want to, and if I do, I'll listen." That surprised her more than it should have. They moved through the room seamlessly. Adrian introduced her to executives, donors, politicians, always the same phrasing. "This is my wife Lena, not new wife, not married recently, just my wife." Each time something in his tone settled heavier than the words required. Then came the moment that changed everything. A man older, sharp-eyed, stepped directly into their path. "Adrian," he said coolly. "Didn't know you were the marrying type." Adrian didn't look away from Lena. "I am," he replied. The man's gaze slid to her, assessing. "And how long has this arrangement been genuine?" Lena felt the subtle shift, the tension, the test. She started to step back. Adrian didn't let her. His arm tightened, drawing her fully against his side. "This isn't an arrangement," he said, voice calm but unyielding. "This is my wife." Silence followed, then polite laughter, apologies, retreat, but Adrian didn't move, even when the moment passed, even when the crowd dispersed. His hand stayed at her waist. Lena looked up at him, confused. "You can let go now." He didn't immediately. "I know," he said, and still he didn't. That was when she realized something unsettling. This marriage might be fake, but the way he was holding her was. Adrian didn't let go until someone cleared their throat behind them. Only then did his hand slip away from Lena's waist, slowly, deliberately, as if releasing something he'd had to think twice about. "Sorry," he said quietly, turning toward the waiter who had interrupted them with champagne. His tone was composed again. Controlled, the moment sealed away. Lena accepted a glass she didn't want, her pulse still racing. "That was convincing," she said under her breath once they were alone again. "It needed to be," Adrian replied. "People like him don't accept half answers." She studied him from the corner of her eye. "You sounded angry." His jaw flexed. "I don't like my private life being dissected." Private life, she almost laughed at that. They spent the rest of the night performing, laughing at the right moments, leaning close when cameras passed, sharing glances that suggested intimacy without crossing any real lines. Lena was good at this. She always had been. Years of being invisible had taught her how to blend in, how to adapt. What unsettled her was how natural it began to feel. The way Adrian adjusted his pace to match hers. The way he noticed when she stopped smiling and subtly steered them away from crowds. The way he asked, softly, too much, when the room got loud. When they finally left, her feet ached and her face hurt from holding the same expression for hours. In the elevator ride up, silence settled between them. "You handled yourself well tonight," Adrian said at last. She shrugged. "I had a good teacher." His gaze flicked to her reflection in the mirrored wall. "You didn't have to." That caught her attention. "Have to what?" "Make it so easy," he said. "You could have kept distance. You didn't." She met his eyes in the reflection. "Neither did you." The elevator chimed, doors opened. For a brief, strange second, neither of them moved. Then Adrian stepped aside. "Good night, Lena." "Good night, Adrian." She walked toward her suite with her heart doing something it had no business doing. The rules were clear. They agreed on them together the next morning over coffee, seated at opposite ends of the long kitchen island like colleagues negotiating terms. Public appearances, necessary. Private boundaries, firm. Bedrooms, separate. No emotional dependency. "This works because it's controlled," Adrian said. "The moment it stops being that, it ends." She nodded. "I don't want confusion." Neither did he, so why did he pause before saying, "If you need anything, tell me"? Days turned into weeks. The world adjusted quickly to the idea of Adrian Blackwood having a wife. Articles appeared, speculations softened, invitations increased. Lena became part of his schedule. She learned his rhythms: early mornings, late nights, black coffee, no sugar. He learned hers: quiet evenings, handwritten notes, the way she hummed when she was thinking. They crossed paths in the penthouse more often than planned. Sometimes in the kitchen, both reaching for the same mug. Sometimes in the hallway, brushing past each other too closely. Sometimes in the living room, late at night, both pretending they hadn't been waiting for the other to come home. They didn't talk about it, but something shifted. The second test came at a family event, Adrian's grandmother's birthday. "She's observant," he warned as they sat in the car outside the estate, "and she won't be fooled by distance." "Good to know," Lena said dryly. "Anything else I should prepare for?" "Yes." He turned to her. "She'll expect you beside me, always." The house was warm, loud, filled with laughter and history Lena didn't belong to, yet the moment Adrian introduced her, "This is my wife," the room embraced her like she did. His grandmother took her hands, studying her face with sharp affection. "You look like someone who sees him." Lena blinked. "I'm sorry, pass the armor," the woman said. "That's rare." Adrian stiffened slightly beside her. Dinner was intimate in ways the gala hadn't been: stories, teasing. Family dynamics Lena had only seen from the outside. Adrian relaxed here, his posture softer, his voice less guarded. At one point his grandmother leaned over and said quietly, "Don't let him disappear into himself again." Lena didn't know how to respond. Later, as they stood in the garden under string lights, Adrian broke the silence. "She likes you," he said. "That's intimidating." He smiled faintly. "She terrifies most people." The smile lingered longer than usual, then his phone buzzed. A work issue. He stepped away. Lena watched him, alone now, surrounded by a life that wasn't hers, until he returned and slipped his hand into hers like it was instinct. She looked down at their joined hands. He didn't let go. That night something changed, not in words, in presence. They sat on opposite ends of the couch but closer than before. Silence stretched, but it wasn't empty. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. Adrian turned toward her. Why did you agree to this?" "There were other options, other women." He considered her carefully. "You were honest. You didn't want me, you needed a solution. And that made me safe?" "No," he said quietly. "It made you real." Her breath caught. "Lena," he added slower now, "this doesn't mean anything beyond what it is." "I know," she said. But they both felt the lie. The next public appearance sealed it. A high-profile investor dinner, important, political. They arrived together. Someone made a comment, dismissive, suggestive. Before Lena could react, Adrian stepped in front of her, not aggressively but definitively. "She's my wife," he said, voice low and dangerous. "Speak to her with respect or not at all." The room froze. Later in the car, Lena stared out the window. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes," he replied. "I did." She turned to him. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Because somewhere along the way, the role had stopped feeling like a role. Because introducing her as his wife no longer felt like a performance. Because letting go had become harder than holding on. But all he said was, "Because I meant it." And for the first time, Lena wondered, what if the marriage wasn't fake anymore? And what would happen if she admitted that she didn't want it to be? Lena started noticing the changes in the smallest ways. Adrian began coming home earlier. Not every night, but often enough that it stopped feeling like coincidence. He'd loosen his tie the moment he stepped inside, jacket slung over his arm, eyes scanning the penthouse until they found her. Sometimes she was curled up on the couch with a book. Sometimes in the kitchen, barefoot, hair pulled up, sleeves rolled to her elbows. He never commented on it, but he always paused. "How was your day?" he'd ask, setting his keys down. Not fine, not busy. He actually waited for the answer. And somehow, without discussing it, dinner became something they shared. At first it was practical, too late to cook separately, too awkward to ignore each other. Then it became routine. Quiet meals, soft conversation, occasional laughter that surprised them both. Still, the rules remained, at least on paper. The first crack came during a storm. Lena woke to thunder so loud it rattled the windows. The city lights flickered below, rain streaking down the glass like veins of silver. She hated storms, always had. She lay there staring at the ceiling, telling herself she was being ridiculous. She was an adult, she didn't need comfort. She certainly didn't need to knock on her husband's door in the middle of the night. Another crack of thunder split the air. She was out of bed before she could talk herself out of it. The hallway was dark except for a thin line of light under Adrian's door. He opened it almost immediately, as if he'd been awake. "Lena," his voice was rough with sleep. Concern replaced it instantly. "What's wrong?" She stopped, pride warred with honesty. "There's a storm." He studied her face for half a second, then stepped aside. "Come in." It wasn't an invitation loaded with meaning, it was simple, human. She sat on the edge of his bed, hands folded tightly in her lap. The thunder followed them inside, but the room felt warmer, safer. Adrian poured her a glass of water, handed it to her without a word, then sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. "You don't have to explain," he said quietly. "I know." Silence settled, the storm raged on. Eventually, without looking at him, she said, "You can go back to sleep." He didn't move. "Lena," he said, voice low, "you're shaking." She hadn't noticed. He hesitated, then draped the blanket around her shoulders, his knuckles brushing her collarbone by accident. Her breath caught, so did his. They froze, the air between them thickened, charged with everything they hadn't said for weeks. "This shouldn't," she started. "I know," he interrupted softly, but neither of them moved away. She leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion finally catching up with her. The storm dulled into a distant hum. Adrian remained seated, alert, protective. At some point she wasn't sure when she drifted off. She woke hours later with her head resting against his shoulder and his arm around her. Morning changed everything. Sunlight streamed through the windows, soft and golden. The storm was gone. Lena became aware of warmth first. Then the steady rise and fall of Adrian's chest beneath her cheek. Then the unmistakable fact that they were far closer than any rule allowed. She inhaled sharply. Adrian stirred instantly. Their eyes met. Time stretched. Neither spoke. Slowly, too slowly, he removed his arm. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She sat up, heart racing. "You didn't do anything." "Yes," he replied, "I did." They stood in silence, the moment heavy with implication. Nothing else was said, but from that morning on, pretending became impossible. The shift followed them everywhere. His touch lingered longer in public. His introductions carried weight. His eyes tracked her in rooms full of people. And Lena found herself wanting the things she'd sworn she wouldn't. She wanted him to come home early, wanted his approval, wanted the warmth of his presence in the dark. Wanted things that didn't belong in a contract. The breaking point came unexpectedly, a dinner party hosted by Adrian's ex. The invitation had arrived weeks ago, polite, sharp, deliberate. "She's testing you," Lena said when Adrian told her. "I know," he replied. "Do you want me to go?" His answer was immediate. Yes, not for appearances, just yes. The evening was tense from the moment they arrived. The ex, elegant, composed, perfectly dressed, greeted Adrian with familiarity that scraped against Lena's nerves. "You married quickly," the woman said lightly, eyes flicking to Lena. "Surprising." "Not to me," Adrian replied. He didn't look away from Lena when he said it. Throughout the night, subtle jabs followed, comments, smiles that didn't reach eyes, questions designed to expose cracks. Lena held her own until she overheard it. "She's temporary," the woman said quietly to someone else. "A convenience, he always gets bored." Lena felt the words like a slap. She turned only to find Adrian already there. He'd heard it too, and something in him snapped. He stepped forward, his hand closing around Lena's, firm and unmistakable. "Let's make something clear," he said, voice calm but lethal. "This woman is my wife, not a placeholder, not a phase, and certainly not temporary." The room went silent. Adrian pulled Lena closer, his arm wrapping around her waist in a way that was no longer performative. "Anyone who disrespects her," he continued, "is done with me." The ex stared, stunned. Lena couldn't breathe, not because of the attention, but because he meant it. They left early. In the car, the silence was thick, vibrating. "You didn't have to do that," Lena whispered. "Yes," he said again, "I did." She turned to him, emotions crashing. "Adrian, this isn't fake anymore." He gripped the steering wheel tightly. "I know, and if we keep going like this, I know," he repeated, softer now. The car stopped outside the penthouse. Neither moved. "Say it," she demanded quietly. "Say what this is." He finally looked at her, really looked at her. "This is me losing control," he said. "This is me wanting you in ways that break every rule we set." Her heart thundered. "And," she asked. "And if we cross this line," he continued, voice rough, "there's no pretending left, no undoing it." She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. That was the moment they both understood. The marriage had started as fake, but the danger now wasn't exposure, it was desire. And neither of them was ready to let go. They didn't touch that night. That was the cruelest part. Adrian walked her to her door, his hand hovering at her back without ever landing. Lena stood inside her suite long after the door closed, heart pounding, replaying every look, every word, every moment where he had chosen her without hesitation. "This is me losing control." The words echoed, and she realized something terrifying. So was she. The next morning felt different, not awkward, worse, careful. They moved around each other like two people standing on thin ice, aware that one wrong step would shatter everything. Breakfast was quiet, too quiet. Their eyes met, then slid away. His coffee sat untouched. Her appetite vanished. "You have a meeting today," Lena said finally, just to break the silence. "Yes." Adrian's voice was neutral, controlled again. "Late one. I'll be out most of the day." "All right, that was it. No, be careful, no text me, no I'll see you later." She left the penthouse feeling hollow. The distance didn't last, it couldn't. By evening, the tension had turned sharp, unbearable. Lena was halfway through reheating dinner she didn't want when the door opened. Adrian walked in, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, eyes dark and unreadable. "You didn't eat?" he said immediately, noticing the untouched plate. Neither had he. "I wasn't hungry." He stepped closer. "You're lying." "So are you." Silence slammed between them. "We can't keep doing this," she said, voice tight, acting like nothing's changed. Adrian stopped in front of her, close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "Then say what you want, Lena." Her breath shook. "I want you to stop pretending this doesn't matter." His jaw clenched. "I stopped pretending days ago." "Then why are we still standing here like this is business?" Because he was afraid, and so was she. He exhaled slowly. "Because the moment I touch you the way I want to, this marriage stops being temporary." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "I don't want temporary," she whispered. Neither did he. That was the moment the last line broke. Adrian reached for her slowly, deliberately, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His hands settled at her waist, firm, grounding, unmistakably real. Lena's fingers curled into his shirt like she'd been holding herself back for weeks. "Tell me to stop," he said, voice rough, forehead resting against hers. She shook her head. "Don't." That was all it took. He kissed her, not rushed, not desperate, deep, certain. Like something he'd been denying himself for far too long. The world narrowed to heat and breath and the way his hand slid into her hair as if it belonged there. Lena melted into him, every nerve awake, heart pounding with a terrifying, exhilarating truth. This wasn't a mistake. This was inevitable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he said. Yes, she replied, it already has. They didn't go to bed together, not yet. Instead, they sat on the couch close enough that their shoulders touched, hands loosely entwined. The intimacy felt heavier now, earned, not borrowed. We need to talk, Adrian said quietly. I know. This started as a contract, he continued. And somewhere along the way I stopped seeing it that way. So did I, he turned to her fully. If we do this, really do this, there are no half measures, no pretending for convenience, no using each other as shields. She met his gaze steady. I won't be hidden and I won't be disposable. You're neither, he said immediately. You're my wife, not for the cameras, not for anyone else, for her. Emotion tightened her throat. Then act like it, she whispered, not just when someone challenges you. His hand squeezed hers. I will. The fallout came faster than expected. The press noticed the shift. Photos. Speculation, headlines about real affection changed dynamics. Adrian's board noticed too, questioned his judgment, his focus. You're distracted, one investor said bluntly. No, Adrian replied calmly. I'm grounded. That unsettled them more than any denial. When Lena heard about it, guilt clawed at her chest. You don't have to choose me over your work, she said that night. Adrian didn't hesitate. I'm choosing balance. You could lose deals. I could lose myself, he said, and I won't. She searched his face, waiting for regret, found none. The real test came when the contract surfaced. 6 months. A termination clause, clean, efficient. Lena stared at the document on the kitchen counter, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. This ends in 4 weeks, she said softly. Adrian closed his laptop. I know, and then what? He walked toward her, stopping just inches away. Then we decide what comes next without lawyers. Her chest tightened. You're sure? Yes, she swallowed, because I won't survive pretending again. He lifted her chin gently. You won't have to. That night they shared the bed for the first time, not because of a storm, not because of convenience, because neither of them wanted to be alone anymore. They lay facing each other, fingers tracing skin, breaths sinking. This scares me, Lena admitted. Me